Okay, come on. Recording.
Hello ICT traders, toodegrees here, and today I want to show you how I would code up a simple market structure tool that shows you short-term, intermediate term, and long-term swing points. So let's dive right in. Now the question is, how are we going to code up these swing points? And what are swing points? Swing points are structure highs and lows, which help us define market structure and also shows us where price is likely to go to rate liquidity. Now the way that I like to code is to sort of start from how I think as a trader. So in this case, I want to start from the definitions that ICT has given us. For a swing low, we have a low with a higher low to the left and to the right of it. And then obviously in reverse, for high, we have a high with a lower high to the left and to the right of it. Now, if we were to take every single swing that we see and just plot it on chart, we would have a big mess. So we need to find a way to filter these, and this is through market structure. Obviously, all of these are important, but they all have different degrees of importance. Some of them are long-term, some of them are intermediate, some of them are short-term. So we're going to have to code all of those individually. Little disclaimer, I'm super new to making videos, and I don't know what happened with my mic, but it just sounds like I was recording in a bathroom after the intro. So I hope everything is clear. If you have any questions, just shoot me a message on Twitter. So if we think market structure, then we can resort to ICT's teaching in the 2022 mentorship episode 12, where he shows us this picture inside of a daily fair value gap on a 1 hour time frame. He defines different types of swing points, and all of these are defined similar to the swing points that we just saw. So a high with a lower high to the left and to the right of it, but they have degrees of importance. We have a long-term high, which has an intermediate high to the right and to the left of it. We have intermediate highs, which have a short-term high to the right and to the left of it. And we also have short-term highs, which I just showed you on chart. So a high candle high, with a candle high to the left and to the right of it that are lower of it. Another way to define intermediate term highs is when they fill up an imbalance. You can see the CB right here. So sell side imbalance, buy side inefficiency. It gets filled back in. And this makes this an intermediate term high, even though it doesn't have a short term high to the left of it that is lower than it. For the purpose of what I'm trying to code right now, this part is going to be left out. I'm just going to focus on coding intermediate term highs as having short term highs to the left and right of it. Okay, so let's start coding this. Let's create a new indicator from this template. We're going to call it simple ICT market structure. We're going to go ahead and put this in our indicator title as well. ICT simple market structure. Okay, so the first thing to do is to code these swing points. And there's a lot of way of doing this. You can use pivot points, which are built in TradingView functions, or use Willem fractals, but I like to code as I think as a trader. So I tend to mark out what my reasoning is, and then I try to code that up. When I look for a swing, I look at the 3 last bars, and I look whether the one in the middle has the highest high of the two. So let's code that up. We're going to have a highest variable, and we're going to check the last 3 bars and see which one is highest. And then just to have a visual representation, we're going to plot something once we know that the highest candle of the last 3 is the candle before the one that is printed. So we're going to call it short-term high, and let's make it a circle above bar. Since we're doing highs currently, we're going to make it black. We're going to have to offset it by 1. Maybe let's make it small, and let's add this to the chart. So now that we've done this, as you can see, every one of these 3 bar patterns has been marked. And now we just need to start organizing them in terms of market structure. This is obviously really hard to do when we're just plotting them. We need to save this data somehow. And in PineScript, the best way to do that is to create arrays. I think here we should create a label array. We're going to call it short-term high, and we're going to initialize it. And then same as before, when we have our condition, so when highest candle high of the last 3 is the one prior, we are going to push this data or save it to our array. We're going to make a new label, and our X position, so our time is going to be the bar index -1 since the high is on the candle prior. Our Y is going to be our height or price, the high of the previous candle. And I think since this is pretty busy, we're just going to use a little trick and have it print text instead of a proper label. Maybe just a little dot, lock to the price. And here for color, what I'm going to do is create a variable, which I'm going to call CNone. And it doesn't really matter what color you use. If you put the transparency to 100, you're going to have no color. So now that we use this, it's not going to plot the label, but it will plot the text. And lastly, since we are plotting highs, the style of this label should be a label dot style label down. And this is just to make sure that the text is above the candle and in the right place instead of somewhere in the middle of it, just because of the label position. Here we have the same spots, but again, we're trying to filter this in microstructure. You can see how many of these there are, even just on a daily chart. So it's important for us to filter them. Okay, so now that we have short-term highs, we need to code up our intermediate term highs. So we need to find a high with a short-term high to the left and to the right of it, and they both have to be lower, just like this one right here. So in our case, this one right here is going to be our intermediate term high. Now we can't do obviously the same trick with candles, so we're going to have to create ourselves a little function or method in this case that we're going to use. Let's call it old swing so that we can check previous swings. That's the idea. And it's going to take in our label array, which we'll call A, and then we'll pass in a type, which will be our high or low. So we're going to have this method be used for both catching highs and lows. If type is high, then what we need to do is go through this array right here and check the last 3 highs and determine whether the one in the middle of the two is the highest of the 3. Remember, we're working with labels, so their Y their parameter is what we're looking for. In this case, we're looking for the very last that we got. So we'll get it from our array and size -1. And we'll compare this one and see if it's less than the prior one. This is our first part. Our second part then is to check whether this one is larger than the third. So now we have our method. Perfect. We'll need a new array, and this is for intermediate term highs. We obviously want to get into finding these when our short-term high array has something in it. Otherwise, we're going to get errors. Specifically, we need 3 highs, so we're going to put 2. So now that we made our method, we can just simply say if short-term high old swing, and then we'll give it our high type. Then we can create our intermediate high. Our intermediate high is going to be a copy of the label that is marked inside of our short-term high array as the intermediate term high. So the one that stands in the middle and that is higher. We'll change the text. So we'll change the text of this intermediate term high. Let's make it this. What we need to make sure is that once we determine our intermediate term high, which is this, we don't continue pushing into the intermediate term array this specific label every time up until a new intermediate high is created. We first have to check whether this is empty or not. If there's nothing in it, we are okay with that. We simply push it. If there's something in it, then what we'll do is check if the label that we're trying to currently push is the same as the one before. And we'll make sure that it is different from the one that we're trying to currently push into it. If that's the case, then we can push. As we can see now, whenever we have a high with 2 short-term highs to the left and to the right of it, we have a little label that comes up. So now we can move on to doing the same exact thing, but with long-term highs. So checking whether we have, when we have 2 intermediate term highs, like these 2, then this will make it a long-term high. We'll change our symbol as well. just like I showed before, between our two intermediates, we can see how we have a long term. So now we have all the highs sorted, and we need to move on to the lows. But instead of just copying this over and just changing it all for lows, what I'm going to do is just update our functions and make this whole script into a function. We'll have to flip these around because we are checking for lows now. And then we'll have to turn this entire thing into a function. So we'll call it ICT, let's call it swing structure maybe. We can call it short-term array, intermediate term, and long term. And then obviously we need to carry in our type for these guys right here. So this highest is going to change based on whether this is a high swing structure or low swing structure. So let's create a variable and let's call it swing. We're going to need a price, which is going to be either the high of the previous candle or the low of the previous candle. Let's pass in our characters because we want different, let's call it labels for each one of these. We're going to need a label variable as well, just because we want to be able to change this. So if our type is high, then we need basically to reassign all of these variables to fit the high requirements. We'll need to reassign them. So we'll give them this operator. Let's begin from our swing. So in the case of highs, we have it easy. It's right here. Price will be the high of the previous bar. Our intermediate label is right here. Long term is right there. And when it comes to label, this is what we're looking for. Now let's do the same thing for lows. Great. Let's put an else. Let me take these out before I forget. These will go into our logic. Let's make a copy for lows as well. So now we have our two distinctions. We just need to generalize this code. Instead of highest, we can put our swing price. And instead of style, we'll have our label type. Now it's very easy. Instead of high, we just need to replace it with an A. Okay, so the last thing to do is to change these two to type so we can process both highs and lows, and then change our labels to intermediate and long term. Our function is completed. We can move down here and we'll test it out with highs first. We should get the same results up here that we already have. Now that we got that, this is where we make functions. We can change all of these low and pass in our type. Now we have our market structure lows as well. Let's see how it behaves. You can see how all these long-term swing points are spot on and very easy to calculate with this logic. Same thing with our intermediate points, and the short-term points are there as well. They're still important, but there is a reason why there is a distinction between them. The last thing I want to do for the code is add a little bit of user inputs. So just allow the user to decide whether they want to see all these type of points or just some of them, and then wrap these two into a marker structure function. So first thing to do would be to add our label as well for short term over here. And what I'm going to do for these is I'm just going to pass in a Boolean variable to decide whether we are going to display them or not. All I'm going to do is going to be bool and then show short term, intermediate term, long term. And based on that, we're going to go in here and do if show short term, intermediate, and long. If yes, we're going to print them. So the label is going to be renamed. Otherwise, we're going to leave it to an A. So nothing will be plotted, basically. And we'll do the same thing for our lows. So obviously now we have more variables. And we can now give it our inputs. The last thing I'm going to do is just make a function that overall creates structure, so includes these two. So we only have one function call for our logic. Now all we need to do is replace these, and we're done. I'm going to be leaving a link to this open source indicator in the description, and I'm going to add it as well into a library, maybe just the functions, so that we can sort of start building a library of tools and things we can use in our own scripts or more complex projects. So for me, that's all, and I hope you learned something.